Good day. So, our lesson for this video lecture, which covers around 2 weeks worth of topics, are foodborne illnesses. So, this is just a recap of the first slide I presented to you in the first lecture. Basically, the point is to remind you that foodborne illnesses are important, and as this is a veterinary public health course. There is a need for us to tackle um, foodborne illnesses because a number of them are derived from food of animal origin. So what are these foodborne illnesses? So these are, again, as the name implies, these are illnesses associated with food, of course. So food articles are derived from animals, so from meat, poultry, eggs, milk, fish, shellfish, and their products. And you have to, again, as I have just mentioned, rather, 70 a huge sum, or as data implied, 75% of foodborne illnesses are due to meat and poultry and their products, which are derived from foodborne animals. So in general, we usually divide foodborne illnesses into two. You have your foodborne intoxication, or simply your food poisoning, and your foodborne infection. So in food poisoning or in food intoxication, of course, a toxicant or a substance that may cause toxic effect to a body is present in food or in spores of toxin producing bacteria. So toxin is the toxicant that is produced by the bacteria. And these such bacteria may germinate and produce the toxin in the food. So the ingestion, for food poisoning, is that we ingest preformed the toxin or the toxicant preformed. Then the toxin is absorbed in the GI tract and cause havoc in its target cells. So basically, because we are ingesting preformed toxin already, the incubation period is very short. So usually, in less than 4 hours, you would see the clinical manifestation of food poisoning. In contrast, foodborne infections naman are, of course, they are infections, so thus they are due to living pathogens in food, wherein they multiply and reach the infective dose in the food. Then we ingest the viable in the infected pathogen itself, not just the toxin, but rather the pathogen that is causing the infection. So they colonize, multiply, and invade tissues, and of course causing a myriad of pathologies. So of course, they may be sequestered in the GI tract and cause GI infection, or they may reach other body parts or the general circulation rather and cause septicemia. And thus, because there is a need to colonize, to multiply, and then invade tissues, the incubation period of foodborne infections, when you compare it to food poisoning, is actually longer. So this is just again, food poisoning or foodborne intoxications are illnesses due to consumptions of toxicants or microbial toxins in food. So these diseases may be caused by chemicals, toxic plants in animals. You have vermicotic toxins produced by molds and others. Then you have your bacterial toxin. Then for foodborne infections, of course, as the name imply, these are caused by ingestion, again, of your viable and infective um, microorganisms or your pathogens. So they may be bacterial, viral, or parasitic infections. So now let's go to the specific causes of your foodborne diseases. So from here on out, hanggang sa matapos itong presentation na ito, this will just be a rundown of the causes, of course, of your foodborne intoxications and foodborne infections. Some of them you may already know because you have discussed them in other subjects like your parasitology, your bacteriology, virology, and others. So for this particular topic, we will be, kumbaga, just sharing the veterinary public health side of that discussion. So first, we'll go to your chemical foodborne intoxicants. First on the line is your antimony, so antimony poisoning. So antimony can be found in your enamelware. So ang antimony rather, leaches doon sa mga kinocontaminate niya yung mga pagkain na kinocontain niya. So especially a problem ito sa mga acidic foods that you contain in such containers. So, the incubation period is from few minutes to hours. Again, because this is intoxication, so mabilis lang yung incubation period. So, among clinical signs that you will see or you will experience if you have this is vomiting, abdominal pain, spasms, collapse, occasionally fatal in very high doses. So, for prevention, of course, discontinue use. For example, yung mga ganitong utensils in your cooking or in your storage because of high risk of antimony poisoning. In the same manner, you have your cadmium poisoning. Again, this is cadmium is an kumbaga, ingredient in the plating of certain metalwares. So again, a problem is usually the cause of cadmium poisoning sa food is yung nagli-leach yung nilagay sana pang plating, pang finish, nilagyan ng high acidic food, nagli-leach out yung cadmium from the supposedly plating of the utensils. So incubation period again is very short, 30 minutes or less. And you may experience, if you have had cadmium poisoning, you may experience nausea, vomiting, cramps, which are often fatal. In chronic exposure naman, for example, there's a incidence in Japan, tinawag nilang itay-itay disease, wherein the cadmium which was being expelled to the environment by factories and other industrial processes, there is chronic exposure sa kanila, kaya nagiging brittle or there is bone pathology because cadmium is replacing calcium sa bones nila, kaya nagiging ganyan yung conformation ng bodies nila. So, for prevention, of course, similar to that of antimony poisoning, wag na lang gamitin yung, pag alam niyo may yung cadmium finish, yung metalware ninyo, just do not use it anymore. Next, you have your copper poisoning. So copper food contact surfaces. So this is partly important because there are in other countries normal sa kanila na yung finish ng countertops nila sa kitchen is copper. So again, is an issue if copper is to leach out of the countertops into the food na nilalagay mo doon. So the incubation period is 1 hour or less, so very fast again. Then you may experience vomiting and non-specific sign. So of course, if for prevention, you may not use your wag ka na magpa-finish or magpalagay ng copper countertops, or do not allow, kung meron na yun siya, do not allow contact food or liquid in copper lined surfaces. And this is an important kumbaga way of mode of having copper poisoning. This was a case in the US ng it was supposed to be edible copper powder, nilagay nila as a decoration ng cake, then ang daming batang na poison. So be careful, especially sa mga food colorants with copper. So similar to your previous copper poisoning, you have your zinc poisoning also, which is a problem in galvanized kitchenware. So again, zinc would leach out into your food, especially if it's mga acid foods. So incubation period is 1 hour or less. You would experience diarrhea, as you see here. Ang daming it's usually GI intestinal problem, so diarrhea, and saka you would taste an astringent taste rather. Sorry. So prevention is of course education for people involved in food preparation, and please do not allow your food, especially if it's acidic, do not allow it to stand in zinc, galvanized zinc, metalware, or your kitchen countertops if it is galvanized zinc. Next, you have your cyanide poisoning. So these are cyanide used to be a fairly common ingredient sa mga silver polish. At saka meron ding, you have to take note that aside from yung mga synthetic silver polish containing ng cyanide that is usually used sa mga kitchens, you also have cyanide containing food. So Again, of course, the vehicle is yung food contaminated with cyanide. So, ang incubation period is from half an hour to 6 hours. And you would experience nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, cold perspiration, exhaustion, and they are often fatal. Because your cyanide actually, there are there are several pathologies involved with cyanide poisoning, which because it is very um, it is a very strong toxicant. So prevention is of course discontinue use of cyanide polishes and careful use ng mga materials that would have cyanide. So do be careful with the type of food or food that you eat, because there was an outbreak, as we will delve out later. May outbreak of cyanide poisoning in Uganda, and the culprit was cassava flour. So next you have your arsenic. So arsenic, together with the next couple of intoxicants, are important ingredients of insecticides and rodenticides. So again, when these insecticides and rodenticides contaminate food, arsenic may cause poisoning, and incubation period is very short, fairly short, an hour or so. You may experience vomiting, diarrhea, which are often fatal. And of course, for prevention, you need to use colored pesticides for you to enable para madali siyang makita at madali siyang ma-identify. That's why, let's say, mga common na um, rodenticides ngayon, like let's say Racumine, they are often very bright pink or other very bright colors para madali silang ma-identify. And of course, do take care, especially in the storage of your insecticides and rodenticides. Next, you have your fluoride. So they are part of insecticides. So especially yung sodium fluoride. And of course, when the vehicle of which is foods that are contaminated with it. So much like arsenic poisoning, less than 1 hour lang din yung incubation period, and you would experience vomiting, retching, cramps, pallor, collapse, um, and which is often fatal pag severe or high dose of fluoride. There is high dose of fluoride poisoning. So prevention is of course discontinue use of insecticides with fluoride. Next, you have your lead, which you may find in your pesticides. So contaminated food again is the vehicle. Incubation period is 1 hour or so. If you have been poisoned with lead, you will experience abdominal pains, vomiting, which may be fatal in high doses. So again, colored pesticides and proper storage are important. Next, you have your methyl alcohol poisoning. Ito medyo kaiba siya. I'm sure you're very familiar with lambanog. There were cases actually in late 2019 December of people from, I think, Region 4 or Laguna, who were killed by toxic coconut wine or your lambanog. So of course, the vehicle there is improperly prepared lambanog. So either adulterated whiskey or improperly prepared lambanog. So very short incubation period, could be from a day or two, which you may experience visual disturbances, weakness, abdominal pains, nausea, vomiting, headache, dizziness, and shortness of breath. And of course, the culprit chemical there is methyl alcohol in improperly prepared lambanog. Next, you have your nitrates, which are often ang tinatawag is Prague powder or curing salt. Ito, I got this screen cap from Shopee. So it is fairly available actually. So you put the mga longganisa or tocino processing would usually put this as a preservative, and a flavoring also. So they are usually found in cured foods. So they may become toxic in very high concentrations. So again, this is a snippet of a news article from Philippine Star. showing that there are sa mga skinless longganisa, yung longganisa na nakabalot sa plastic, there may be high level or dangerous level of nitrates. Kahit low level lang siya, it may be dangerous. So, incubation period is several days. Then you may experience cyanosis, vomiting, and diarrhea, especially in infants. So, masarap san ang tocino and chorizo, but do be careful with what you eat, especially if you do not know where those came from. The next, you have your sodium ecotinate and sodium sulfite. So, these are dyes ng meat. So meats are dyed to maintain the red colors, of course, to maintain the appearance of freshness. So, example nito, this is a figure from this article. If you see, this is the old frozen and preserved meat. Ito yung kinulayan from the same batch, kinulayan nila ng sodium sulfite. You can see here na very somewhat na preserved or somewhat it could be mistaken for fresh ground beef, but it is not. It's just dyed by sodium sulfite, and sodium sulfites in excess or very high concentrations is very dangerous because they may cause general vasodilation with cutaneous symptoms of itching, burning, and heat and redness. So it may cause food poisoning. So in cases of chemical foodborne poisoning or food poisoning, these may be possible sources. So as previously mentioned, mga utensils, mga plated utensils, which may have cadmium or antimony. So accidental addition to food, mga insecticides, such as those that contain sodium fluoride. That's why it is important that mga insecticides, pesticides, and rodenticides must be brightly colored and must be labeled properly and stored properly. So, residues of spray applications, so mga lead and arsenic residues on fruit sprays. That's why it is actually a preservative for the food, but you might want to reduce these contaminants by washing them properly. That's why do not especially so not just fruits but in other mga vegetables, do please wash them before. If you intend to eat them raw, please do wash them properly. So again, ito na yung mechanical leaking of equipment. So example is your metal chloride from refrigeration, and yung mga pag-leach ng copper, pag-leach ng lead, ng zinc, which are maybe part of the kitchen environment. So those are very important considerations. Now we're done with your chemical intoxicants or chemical toxicants. Now let's go to food poisoning or intoxication due to toxic plants and animals. Of course, first on the line, very famous seasonally, you have your paralytic shellfish poisoning or yung red tide poisoning na sinasabi natin. So basically, these are due to consumption of mussels, clams, fish, mga seafood that contain the biotoxin, which is produced by your dinoflagellates. So an example is your pyridinium bahamense, and the biotoxin important for red tide poisoning is saxitoxin. And these toxins are actually filtered and accumulated in the bodies of these fish and shellfishes. And kaya nga kahit lutuin natin itong mga tahong, for example, or lutuin natin yung mga isda na may that had accumulated biotoxins, hindi pa din nagkakaroon pa rin ng cases ng red tide poisoning because the toxins are thermostable. So they are able to withstand cooking or preservation through freezing. And the incubation period is very short, so 5 to 30 minutes. So you would often experience mga GI problems, cardiovascular problems, and nervous disturbances, mga hot and cold sensations, tingling, mga numbness of extremities due to the nervous effect of the toxin, and oftentimes death would be attributed to your respiratory paralysis. So what's for the prevention rather, excuse me, what is important here is you always watch out for mga news regarding, especially from before, regarding areas na minomonitor for red tide. So there are 5 areas in under monitoring since July 2022. So if doon ka sa area na yun, do not consume seafood, of course. Because again, no matter how much you cook, how much you freeze, the toxin is is thermostable. Next, you have your scromboid poisoning. So this is primarily it is actually histamine toxicity. So they resemble allergies. So they are implicated. The food implicated herein are your scromboid fish. So they have high levels of histamine. So yung histidine, which is an normal amino acid naman. So when there is over contamination ng mga spoilage bacteria, this histidine is converted to histamine. And you have to remember that your histamine is your allergy molecule. Kaya nga yung gamot niyo sa allergies are antihistamine. So, they are histamine molecules. So, do consider or do know that histamine, the toxin, is heat resistant. So, kahit iluto niyo siya minsan, it will still cause the poisoning. So, there's oral burning sensation, mga flushing of the face, neck, etc. Ito, mga pula-pula, palpitations, rash, GI symptoms, which may actually last less than 1 day. Do take note also that yung scromboid poisoning is actually self-limiting. And the fishes that are, example of fishes that are commonly implicated in scromboid poisoning is maybe fresh, canned, dried, or smoked, or salted. So, of course, how do you prevent this? Of course, is to limit the growth of these spoilage bacteria that would convert histidine into histamine. So, how do you do this? Of course, rapid and uninterrupted refrigeration of fish. I've already discussed in the previous slide kung bakit refrigeration or subjecting the food into unfavorable conditions for the bacteria would limit their growth. Next, you have your mushrooms. So, consumption of poisonous mushrooms. For example, you have your Amanita phalloides and your Amanita muscaria. So, you have your phalloidine and muscarine and other alkaloids that are toxic alkaloids that are found in such mushrooms. So, incubation period may be 15 minutes to 15 hours, and which may include, if in excess, not in excess, but in high doses, you may experience salivation, severe abdominal pain, intense thirst, nausea, retching, vomiting, profuse diarrhea, and the condition may be fatal. So, of course, for prevention, do not eat such mushrooms or be wary of such mushrooms. And if you do not know if that particular mushroom is poisonous or not, just do not consume it. Next, you have your rhubarb poisoning. So, you have poisoning by plants. So, there are high level of oxalic acid in the leaves of your rhubarb. So, you can eat the stalk, but do not eat the leaves. So, if you are able to eat, if nakain mo yung leaves, incubation period of rhubarb poisoning would be 2 to 12 hours, and you would experience diarrhea, vomiting, and thirst. So, you may be very prone to dehydration once the clinical signs of rhubarb poisoning kicks in. Next, you have your castor bean poisoning. So, ricin toxin is the main toxicant found in castor beans. Excuse me. So, if if you have had accidentally consumed it, so the incubation period is from few minutes to several hours. So, you will experience colic, thirst, vomiting, diarrhea, cold sweats, and you may collapse. Next, ito na yung sinabi ko kanina na cassava poisoning, which is highly related to your cyanide poisoning. So, hydrocyanic acid and cyanide gas is the problem or the toxicant in cassava, which is naturally occurring in cassava rather. So, there is cyanide in the bark of the cassava. So, incubation period ng cassava poisoning is 30 minutes to 6 hours. You may experience nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, cold sweats, exhaustion, and cases are often fatal. So, how do you prevent this? So, since nionite is found in the bark, you must properly peel your cassava. And when you are boiling the cassava, please remove the lid to release the fumes of hydrogen cyanide and do not inhale. Then, yun nga, yung cassava with regards, hindi lang na, di ba sabi dun sa slide kanina, there are reportedly cases in Uganda, but in 2015, cassava poisoning also happened in Santa Cruz, Davao del Sur, so in Region 11. Take note that it also happens here in the Philippines. Next, I'm sure you're familiar with this. You have your ergotism, claviceps purpurea, ergot and rye, this one. These are fungal parasites of rye. So the food that is implicated in ergot poisoning is actually rye meal or bread. So incubation period is gradual, so several meals of the deceased rye or yung bread na ginamitan nito or na meron nito. So there is gangrene of the limbs as shown here. Ears, so my extremities needed there is gangrene, then convulsive depression, weakness, headache, painful cramps in the extreme extremities rather. Then of course for you to prevent it, you should only use rather ergot free rye flours for baking. And now you have your mycotoxins. So these are toxins, of course, produced by fungus. So especially fungi that are found in or that contaminate or thrive in food articles. So especially those that grow in grain or in feed. So for example, here a mold is growing in the peanut. So mycotoxins, for example, like your aflatoxin, as caused by Aspergillus flavus. Then your ochratoxin are produced by certain species of molds. Then foods involved are often mga staple cereals, so corn, rice, high protein oil, seeds like peanuts, cotton seeds, dried coconut, milk, and eggs. So conditions that would increase the likelihood of contamination of mycotoxins is high moisture rather, more than 15%, and high temperature also. So this encourages the growth of the molds that produce the toxin. Then most of these mycotoxins are not destroyed by normal or cooking process. That is the normal process of producing feeds or normal process of preparing these raw materials. Itong mga foods involved. And if a human is able to say contract mycotoxicosis, they may experience jaundice, swollen abdomen, inappetence, liver cancer, and often death. So next, we have your intoxication by bacterial toxin. But of course, these are caused by toxicants that are produced by your bacteria that may proliferate or may contaminate your food. So first on the line is your botulism. So it is in your paralytic disease caused by the ingestion of the botulinum toxin. Of course, your Clostridium botulinum. So do take note that the toxin, primarily the types A, B, E, and F, are heat labile. So they are easily broken down by heat. So Clostridium botulinum is just a general briefer in your botulinum. Clostridium botulinum, it is a prophytic, so it may be found in the environment. It is a strict anaerobe. It has spores. It is spore forming. It's gram positive. And its vegetative cells are easily killed at 60 degrees Celsius. So it is the vegetative cells themselves are easily killed. So they have low heat resistance. However, yung Botox or your botulinum toxin is produced in low oxidation reduction potential. So specifically in anaerobic environment. So for example, canned goods, tight plastic wraps, mga food masses, and foods where, for example, yung mga pagkain na may not necessarily be in an anaerobic environment, but a pseudo anaerobic environment is produced because other bacteria or other pathogens would consume the oxygen and leaving the environment near that of the Clostridium botulinum to be nearly anaerobic or anaerobic rather. But again, they are spore forming and their spores that they produce, for example here, itong mga green depicted as the green mga capsules inside the vegetative cells are heat resistant, and they are, although you may inactivate it at 121 degrees for 8 minutes, so basically your autoclave conditions, so 121.15 may inactivate these spores, and they are sensitive to chlorine. So again, the toxin, the botulinum toxin, is heat sensitive, so heat labile. It is easily inactivated at 80 degrees Celsius. So they may cause double vision, thirst, disability swallowing. There is no fever, however, so respiratory paralysis, leading to death in 3 to 5 days if it is not um, given medical attention. So do take note that your botulinum toxin causes flaccid paralysis, wherein the release of acetylcholine from the nerves is inhibited. So food inadequate treatment, especially yung they are allowed to stand from 4 degrees to 50 degrees Celsius and they are eaten raw. So they are often the food that are most commonly implicated. So prevention is of course adequate treatment on food of low acid food. So usually you subject low acid food into higher treatment temperature because low acid food allow the proliferation of food pathogens. So adequate refrigeration, meat at 3 degrees Celsius. So of course you need to refrigerate. You proper keep your food at proper refrigeration temperature, usually below 3 or below 4 degrees Celsius. Avoid cooked food that were allowed to stand for some time because again, yun yung food that are implicated. And of course, boil your food often. And there are, in the I think early 2000s or late 90s, naging sikat ang Clostridium botulinum together with botulinum toxin due to infant botulism. And the food that was implicated there is your honey. So, namuhay sa anaerobic conditions ng inside the jar, the honey jar, yung Clostridium and produced its toxin. So, most commonly affected were children or young adults. Next, you have intoxication caused by the toxin produced by your Staphylococcus aureus or staphylococcal intoxication. It is actually fairly common. In 2014, a case, there was an outbreak of it in Misamis. Then, it is caused by the heat-stable toxin of your Staphylococcus aureus. So, compare this to botulism, wherein the botulinum toxin is heat labile. This one is heat stable. So, they grow in food. What makes Staphylococcus aureus peculiar is that they grow in food, produce the toxin without odor or taste. So hindi mo maaninag that the food is stale or it is contaminated with Staph aureus. So just a briefer again of your Staph aureus. This is a hardy organism, halophilic, so like salty environment. So can withstand up to 7.5% salt in the environment. Then the temperature is from 6 to 48 degrees Celsius. So the Staph aureus that may produce the enterotoxin may come from your nose, the throat of the skin lesion, the feces of someone that is preparing the food, or may come from mastitic udder because again your Staph aureus can cause mastitis. So mga unpasteurized milk may be implicated. Poultry tissues, again, Staph aureus is a cause of bumblefoot. So mga mahilig kumain ng isaw. So may nagkumain ng mga Adidas yung paa. So, Contamination is usually occurring after the food has been cooked. So do be careful with that. So again, because enterotoxin is heat resistant and can withstand boiling up to 1 hour or even autoclaving. So the incubation period is around 1 to 6 hours and usually occurs. The disease usually manifests 2 to 3 hours after consumption of the staph toxin. Then you may experience sudden onset of nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, diarrhea, headache, chills, fevers, and which may last 1 to 2 hours. So they say that it is self-limiting, but do be very careful with it. So how do you prevent it? Of course, reduce incidence of contamination of food. So education on food prep, food hygiene, and do not allow people with may mga skin lesions, may mga ubo, and whatsoever. And of course, avoid cross-contamination ng raw and cooked food. Because again, most commonly, the contamination with staph or is occurs after the food has been cooked, rather. So, prevention of growth and toxin production. So, of course, keep food above or below 5 to 60 degrees Celsius. This is in food microbiology, this is called your danger zone. So 5 degrees Celsius to 60 degrees Celsius. So if you want to preserve it or to keep it in good quality, you refrigerate, you freeze it below 5 degrees Celsius, and you cook it more than 60 degrees Celsius. So and you chill, or if you want to preserve it, you chill the food rapidly below 6, so below 5. Next, you have your Bacillus cereus, your B series gastroenteritis. It may cause the cause of which or the disease is manifested as mild enteritis and is caused by the number of toxins produced by Bacillus cereus, primarily your exotoxin and your enterotoxins, HBl and ENTK. So again, Bacillus, much like your Clostridium, are spore formers. They are aerobe and gram positive. So these spores, just like again your Clostridium, are very resistant to heat and other environmental conditions. So if, however, heat shock may trigger the spores to germinate. So they may be sourced from the soil, dust, because Bacillus cereus is saprophytic in nature. So they multiply exponentially in contaminated food, which makes kahit konting spores lang yung nag-contaminate sa food mo, it becomes a significant cause of food poisoning. So the toxin is released in food. The toxin may be released sa food or in the GI tract as yung buong bacterial cell is consumed and degraded, nare-release din yung toxin. So it may be released sa food itself, or nakakain mo yung bacteria sa food, then yung toxin sa loob ng bacteria is released in the GI tract, causing the food poisoning. So an important Bacillus cereus has public health importance because it is the cause of your fried rice syndrome. So again, a number of cases, there are a number of students from PUP, which I think in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, na they encountered food poisoning through eating fried rice. So alam naman natin na in the Philippines we eat usually the fried rice, that yung rice na ginagamit natin sa fried rice ay day-old rice or yung mga bahaw. So again, Bacillus cereus might be present in the food, especially if it is the food that was used in the rice that was used in fried rice was not preserved properly, or after the fried rice was cooked, inalaw lang siya to stand. So fried rice syndrome is linked with Bacillus cereus gastroenteritis. So there are actually two syndromes. There is vomiting and diarrhea. So in 2 to 8 hours, the first 2 to 8 hours, you may experience vomiting. Then after that, from 8 to 16 hours, you may experience diarrhea. So what do you usually see in cases of Bacillus cereus gastroenteritis? So you have your nausea, abdominal cramps, watery diarrhea, vomiting, which may occur a day or less. So somewhat self-limiting. So rice, again, your rice, ano nga siya, rice, fried rice syndrome nga siya. So kilala siya as fried rice syndrome. So cereals, custards, meats, sauces, and others. Meatloaf also. So of course, prevention is, of course, you need to cook your food properly. And you need to keep it warm. So it needs to be above the danger zone. So 5 to 60, so dapat more than 60 degrees Celsius. You need to keep your food warm. Then if you are to eat mga leftovers, yung mga tira-tira, you need to cook it at more than 70 degrees Celsius. And of course, good hygiene in the preparation, because again, Bacillus cereus is a prophytic and it may come from dust or the air. And very few spores are very important in their colonization sa food. Next is another species of Clostridium. You have your Clostridium perfringens. Again, it causes gastroenteritis due to the toxin, enterotoxin, specifically that of type A, which is due to the ingestion of large number of vegetative cells. The vegetative cells contain the toxin, so if they are able to proliferate in food, you may have a problem with intoxication or food poisoning. So similar to that other mechanism sa Bacillus cereus, the toxin is released during sporulation in the gut. So the source could be from feces, GIT of infected animals or humans, soils, dust, sewages. So it is also saprophytic. So temperature-wise, they prefer the Clostridium perfringens, 15 to 50 degrees Celsius. pH, they are inhibited by pH that are lower than 5 and more than 9. So basically, they would prefer mga pH neutral, low acid to pH neutral mga pH. Then spores are heat resistant, as you would expect. And again, much like Bacillus cereus, heat shock would allow them to germinate. Then they are inhibited by 5% sodium chloride, which is salt. So the incubation period is very short. So 8 to 16 hours to usually 6 to 24 hours. So about 1 day according to the USCDC. Then they cause acute abdominal pain, diarrhea, dehydration, prostration. There is no fever, and this entire clinical manifestation may perhaps last 1 day. So sa food, what is implicated is usually cooked meat, poultry that has stayed at room temperature for several hours, or also gravy, stews, and meat pies. So food that was cooked that was allowed to stand. So how do you prevent this? Of course, you need to cook your food properly. So cooking food from at 100 degrees Celsius boiling temp for 1 to 2 hours may be enough. Chill flesh foods promptly. So your meats dapat again, chilling must be immediately at less than 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, at less than that. Then avoid contamination of cooked food. Again, separate the preparation of your raw and cooked food. And of course, hygienic practices during food preparation. Now, let's move on to the somewhat second part of this presentation. So again, here we have your foodborne infections. Of course, as the name implies, these are caused by infections of microorganisms that may cause invasion, growth, and damage to tissues in the tissues of your GI, primarily your GIT. So ingestion of live and infected pathogens is the route of infection. They colonize, multiply, and invade, as shown here, your GI tissues, your GI lining, and they may be bacterial, viral, or parasitic infections. So first on the line on your bacterial foodborne pathogens is Salmonella, or disease salmonellosis. So it is a member of your Enterobacteriaceae And there are actually just two species that are pathogenic to humans here, Salmonella enterica and Salmonella bangori. However, itong Salmonella enterica, masyadong madaming mga subtypes. So, for example, you have the Salmonella typhi and Salmonella paratyphi, which causes your typhoid fever. And you also have your Salmonella typhimurium and your Salmonella enteritidis, which are a common cause of your non-typhoidal salmonellosis. So, zoonosis-wise, dito tayo sa mga non-typhoidal. However, for the purpose of this lecture, we will consider both typhoidal and non-typhoidal salmonella. So these are gram-negative. They are facultative anaerobes. They are motile rats, non-spore forming, and they may survive 5 to 45 degrees Celsius, but their optimum temperature is 35 to 37. So normal body temp, because again, these are pathogens of mammals. So, or not only mammals, of animals rather. So they can survive in the environment, prolonged periods in the environment, so 48 days in feces, 152 days in water, and 231 days in the soil. So of course, transmission is fecal-oral, or they may be vertical and um, vertical transmission in chickens. So from the hen to the chicken. That's why the egg is an important food that is involved often in salmonellosis. So human infections usually is, of course, through ingestion of contaminated food. So this may be eggs, as previously mentioned, poultry, pork, beef, fish, peanut butter, and contaminated water. So incubation period is 6 hours to 3 days, or often last up until 2 weeks. Then clinical signs vary from simple gastroenteritis, so GIT involvement, to systemic disease, to focal disease, and pero more commonly, it is a gastroenteritis. So you may experience a number of clinical signs depending on the type that you will get. With regards to control, dito tayo, we do not treatment of salmonellosis in humans is not in our domain. So dito tayo sa control of salmonellosis. So usually, as you may have already have put it in, as I have mentioned in the beginning of this lecture, that majority of foodborne infections, foodborne illnesses are due to food articles that are of animal origin. So that notion also holds true for salmonellosis. So the major reservoir salmonellosis are usually poultry and livestock, and also their products. So to prevent infection, you need to remove salmonella infected animals. You need to ID salmonella infected animals in your farm. So changing of the slaughtering methods that will lessen the population of salmonella in the meat. So maintaining good hygienic practices during processing and protecting processed food from contamination. So that is from the processing perspective. Now, in household perspective, you need to consume properly cooked food. With regards to milk and milk products, you need to consume pasteurized only, and refrigerate foods. Again, less than 5 degrees Celsius is appropriate for proper storage, and of course to prevent the reproduction of salmonella. So next, you have your Campylobacter. So it's caused by Campylobacter jejuni subspecies jejuni and Campylobacter coli. So the most common causes of human Campylobacter. So again, these are gram-negative. They are non-spore forming, and they are sometimes curved or helical rods. They are microaerophilic, and they prefer 37 to 42 degrees Celsius and a pH of 5.5 to 8. So again, low acid to neutral. They are heat labile. However, they are very labile rather. So heat at more than 60 degrees Celsius would inactivate them. Strong acids, salts, and drying would also inactivate the pathogenic agent. So, however, in very high numbers, they may be able to survive cooking, or if they are protected from heat. So for example, they are able to contaminate mga high-fat food, which increases their thermal resistance. So again, there are several, according to this figure, there are several pathways for which Campylobacter may find its way to the food that you eat. So it could come from Campylobacter farm level contamination, and again, this level of contamination would be exacerbated if the slaughtering practices is very unsanitary. So going back to that control method sa Salmonella, if unsanitary practices are unsanitary slaughter practices are continued, dadami talaga ang contaminants. So again, may also be contamination due to market level. So contamination, cross-contamination with other food products. And of course, improper cooking, household level, improper cooking may also play a role in um, Campylobacteriosis. So do take note that for Campylobacteriosis, specifically though that is caused by Campylobacter jejuni sa species jejuni, there are very few cells lang ang kailangan to cause illnesses. So primarily 10 to 500 cells only. So be careful with contaminants. So incubation period is 1 to 7 days, so about a week. Then you would experience nausea, abdominal cramps, diarrhea, headache, which are varying in severity. So possible food articles that might have brought you Campylobacteriosis. So raw milk again, egg, poultry, raw beef, cake icing, and water. Contaminated water, of course. So to prevent it, you need to pasteurize your milk, of course. Cook foods properly, again, more than 60 degrees Celsius. Then, prevent cross-contamination. Prepare raw food separately from your cooked food. Do not allow contamination of your cooked food already. Third, you have your enterohemorrhagic Escherichia coli or your E. coli, the most famous of which is your E. coli 0157H7. So these are producing Shiga toxin or verotoxin producing E. coli. So they cause hemorrhagic colitis. So this is the colon of an individual that was infected with E. coli H0157H7. So very hemorrhagic na yung colon niya. So hemorrhagic colitis, which may actually lead to hemolytic uremic syndrome or HUS. So transmission is of course fecal-oral ingestion because it is due to ingestion of contaminated food, water, or contact with infected animals. So undercooked or underpasteurized animal products such as your ground beef is often implicated, meat and sausages, and unpasteurized milk and cheeses. So usually it is your ruminant that is implicated as the reservoir. Primarily beef, actually. Cattle are implicated as the reservoir of enterohemorrhagic E. coli. So incubation period is 1 to 16 days, so about 1 day to about 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks. And clinical signs would actually appear mostly around 3 to 4 days post ingestion or post exposure. They may be asymptomatic or water-dirty at first, or they may be as severe as hemorrhagic colitis and hemolytic uremic syndrome. So for your hemorrhagic colitis, again, as I previously mentioned, ito nga, as an example with bowel or colon of an individual that had this infection. So there is bloody profuse diarrhea, abdominal tenderness or cramps. There's also nausea, vomiting, and dehydration. For HUS naman, this result to the toxin or not toxin, but the bacteria and its byproducts, metabolic byproducts causing kidney injury to hemolytic anemia, to thrombocytopenia in the patient. So for control, of course, you need to do proper selection and preparation of your food products. So proper refrigeration again is very important, and hygiene of travelers are important also. Then slaughtering of animals, must only be done after inspecting the animal and testing for the presence of EHEC, because if an EHEC positive animal is slaughtered together with other animals, contamination may occur, and of course nagko-contaminate na yung ibang meat na kasama no EHEC positive na animal. So next, you have your vibriosis. So basically, food implicated here are food articles from aquatic animals and seafood. And generally, the species that cause vibriosis can be divided into cholerogenic and non-cholerogenic. So your cholerogenic, of course, those that are capable of producing cholera toxin is your Vibrio cholerae. Then for non-cholerogenic, you have your Vibrio parahemolyticus, Vibrio volnificus, Vibrio fluvialis, and Vibrio mashtikovki. So your Vibrio cholerae, this is focused on your Vibrio cholerae, they are gram-negative bacteria. They are curved or comma shaped, as you can see here. They are non-spore forming. Your aerobes or facultative anaerobes. Then they are motile with a single flagellum, as you may have, yeah, you can see here. And their optimum temp of growth is 40 degrees Celsius, and they may be able to survive 6% concentration of salt. Medyo halophilic din sila. So the incubation period of vibriosis often range from 12 hours to 15 days. So they may develop rice watery diarrhea with fishy odor, pale gray stool with severe abdominal cramps, and high fever um, that are clinical signs of grave cholera. Then, if the patient is not given medical attention, it may lead to, of course, because of severe diarrhea, may lead to severe dehydration, loss of electrolytes, circulatory collapse, and even death. So, cholera is a very serious disease. So much like other foodborne infections that we've already discussed, control and prevention of Vibrio cholerae or your other Vibrio species, to be honest, is actually just related to hygienic practices in cooking and preparation of food. And also, um, you need to be careful if you have liver disease, diabetes, and other kidney disease. You may not want to eat seafoods because may have your cholera, which could exacerbate the disease that you can get, the cholera that you can get because of pre-existing condition. And of course, public health education is very important in preventing such diseases. So next, we have your listeriosis. So basically, listeriosis is infection caused by Listeria monocytogenes. So the incubation period of listeriosis may be from 2 to 3 weeks. And common clinical signs would be involve your CNS or your reproductive system. So meningitis, septicemia, or miscarriages, especially in pregnant women. So food articles that are possibly involved include your vegetables, milk, cheese, meat, and seafood. So of course, so how do you prevent this? You need to pasteurize your milk. As in here, cook foods properly, wash your vegetables, please, and avoid contamination. And of course, sanitary and hygienic practices of food processing is always important. So next, you have your Yersinia enterocolitica infections or Yersiniosis. So incubation period is 1 to 3 days, and symptoms that may occur to you if you get this, if you get infected with Yersinia enterocolitica, is enterocolitis, as the species name of the bacteria implies, which will mimic acute appendicitis. So, highly noted as food article involved with Yersiniosis is actually pork. But other food types include your raw milk, mga chocolate milk, water, and other raw meats may also cause Yersiniosis. So of course, you need to pasteurize your milk, cook food properly, and ensure that there is no cross-contamination. And by that, you make sure that you prepare your cooked meat separately from food that are supposed to be intended to be eaten raw. Now, let's move to your viral foodborne pathogens. So there are several viruses that can cause illnesses in humans. So these include your noroviruses, your Hepa A and Hepa E, rotavirus, IG virus, astroviruses, sapoviruses, adenoviruses, Coxsackie virus, parvoviruses, and picornaviruses. So your astrovirus, together with rotavirus, enteric adenoviruses, and Kalichi viruses, cause acute gastroenteritis in humans. Whereas your hepatitis A and E, as the name implies, cause liver inflammation and pathology, and transmission is via fecal-oral route. Your enteroviruses will cause diarrhea, abdominal pain, and fever and vomiting. So usually the source of contamination ng mga viral foodborne infections are those related to yung mga food handlers na infected and they are involved in the preparation of food, or yung processing and preparation ng mga animal products that are intended for human consumption, and that particular animal is a known reservoir of such viruses. Vectors may also play a role. Other transmission routes such as sexual intercourse, coughing, sneezing, respiratory routes, contamination with fecal samples or fecal material is also common. You have to take note that viruses do not cause spoilage of food, unlike bacteria. So you may not be able to sense it, of course, because viral particles are very, very small. You may not be able to sense na your food is contaminated with viruses because hindi naman siya nasa-spoil, but that is important because only very few viral particles can cause illnesses. So be careful in using the water that you use in preparing mga raw products, raw food articles such as mga salads, etc. Yung mga pinanghuhugas nyo ng fruits, ng vegetables, because they may contain such viruses. Then of course, again, ulit tayo, proper hygiene in preparation of your food is very, very important. So next, we have your parasitic foodborne infection. So of course, first in line, you have your protozoans. So hindi ko na to sila isa-isahin because usually the food articles that are involved in foodborne infections due to protozoans are actually involved in their life cycle. So mostly these are zoonotic in nature. Ito sila. Our concern are those that are mostly zoonotic in nature. So please do review the life cycle of each animal that you have, of each foodborne protozoans listed herein. Next, you have your foodborne trematodes. So this is very sikat here sa atin in the Philippines. You have your Paragonus westermani, Lunorchis and Opistorchiasis, your liver flukes, Fasciola and Fasciolopsis buscae, members of your Fasciolidae. Then you have your intestinal flukes, your heterophytes, and your Echinostoma. Ecchinostomatidae or Echinostoma and Ilocanum and Ecchinostomum malayanum. So aside from trematodes, you also have your tapeworms. So of course, Teniasis or your cysticercosis is a very important foodborne parasite, which is babalikan one of the important facets actually of meat inspection is to detect cysts caused by Taenia solium or your cysticercosis. Then aside from that, you also have your Diphyllobotrium latum. So do review the life cycle of this. So aside from them, you also have your Trichinella spiralis, which often involved is your pigs or your pork. So this is the Trichinella spiralis inside the muscle tissue of a pig. Sa seafoods, of course, meron din. You have your anisakis, yung mga anisakid parasitic infections ninyo. So primarily, the main host talaga nila supposedly is mga aquatic mammals, and mga intermediate host sila are fish, but usually yung mga fish contaminated with the L3, the infective stage, ayan, nasa RO, they are found in the meats and the tissues of fish na sometimes nakakain ng tao, so nagkakaroon ng anisakis, anisakid infections. So, we are now at the end of our second video lecture. I know medyo mahaba-habang lecture ano ito, lecture video around clocking around 1 hour, I think. So, I do hope that you will learn much in this very brief rundown of your foodborne illnesses. And I do hope that you will learn more through reading the assigned reading materials and assigned reading assignments to you and taking down your notes. So, on that regard, thank you very much for your attention and have a good day.